Hi guys, this is Karol. Welcome back to my channel. It's been a little bit over 2 months since my last fertility update. A lot has happened and I wanted to come on here and let you guys know what has happened. So in my last video, I shared that RGI was able to recreate our genetic probe to screen our embryos for TSC, and that I was waiting to hear about when we could officially start the cycle with Cornell. And this was back on November 4th or 5th. Since then, we have actually completed 2 cycles and we've had some genetic testing done, all of which I'm gonna share right here. So we did start a microdose Lupron protocol cycle in early November, and the cycle lasted about 9 or so days before we decided to unfortunately cancel it. In those 9 days, 4 to 5 follicles started to develop, and I went into the clinic for monitoring all of that. But I noticed early on that something was off. And the way that I picked this up, where I felt this, was that in each appointment, the follicle sizes were kind of all over the place. So based on my last 2 cycles with Columbia, you could just tell that the follicles were all growing together. And for this cycle, or the first cycle with Cornell, there were follicles developing, but the size difference was pretty significant. And so from the beginning, I knew that something just didn't feel right, but we still kept going. And it wasn't until that day 9, maybe even day 10, where we made the decision to cancel the cycle. And I was really upset because this was right before our trip to Venice for my birthday. And I thought this was it. Like, there was nothing that could be done, or I'm gonna have to cancel my trip. All these thoughts kind of came up. And the doctor actually told me that we could transition into a second cycle, which I didn't know. And I actually raised this to him. I said, well, I did a dual stim protocol at Columbia, which did not go well. My body did not like it. And he said, that's not the same thing, because you are going to do a second cycle in the second, I guess, menstrual cycle period or something like that. I think the difference, and I'm not really good at explaining all of these very technical things, but canceling a cycle and starting another one a week or 2 later is not the same thing as doing a dual stim protocol. And so he told me that, you know, we wouldn't be repeating what Columbia did. So at the end of that 9 or 10 day period, I took a trigger shot, and the doctor instructed me to do something called estrogen priming, which I was also hesitant about, being that I'm sensitive to estrogen. But my fertility doctor spoke with my pulmonologist and they all agreed that it was fine. I was asked to use this estrogen patch from November 21st to the 28th. So essentially while I was away in Venice. During this first cycle as well, my doctor recommended something called human growth hormones, and that's something that could stimulate more follicles. And at first, again, hesitant about it because it sounds like, you know, adding more hormones to my body, but it was a really great synergy between my fertility doctor and my pulmonologist. And so they agreed that if we were going to do a second cycle, that it would be worth considering or using the human growth hormone, which is abbreviated HGH. So fast forward on November 28th, after I finished my estrogen priming, and actually I had gotten back from my trip, we were due to start our second cycle. And this cycle followed an Antagonist protocol, which was something that Columbia had suggested after our dual stim protocol failed. And in essence, I think it's just using a lower dose medication to essentially try to get the same results as if you were doing really high levels of medication. The only difference with the second cycle would be the addition of the human growth hormones. The cycle also lasted about 10 days, and in that period, 5 to 7 follicles developed. And so the doctor felt pretty confident that they would be retrieving at least 5. So the good news is that second cycle worked. Albeit, I think I have to say that throughout this whole process, these last 2 cycles, I did not feel very good. I had a lot of nausea, some headache, and I think a general feeling of unwellness. And compared to Colombia, I think it's night and day, because when I was doing my first 2 cycles with Colombia, I didn't feel anything except maybe some mild back pain. And with the 2 cycles at Cornell, the Microdose Lupron and the Antagonist with the human growth hormones, for both of those, I felt pretty nauseous. But I made it through to retrieval, and they were actually able to collect 7 follicles, which I was super ecstatic about. And if you think about it, that's nearly double the success rate from the 1 cycle at Colombia. So even though I did the dual stem protocol that did 2 back-to-back retrievals, the max number of follicles they collected at one time was 4. So this one collecting 7, I think it was obvious that it had a greater result. So of those 7, 5 were mature, which is still a great number. And of those 5, 3 fertilized successfully. 3 grew to blastocysts, which was amazing news for us. And another really interesting difference in this cycle that we pursued was that 1 out of the 3 embryos grew to blastocyst on day 5, and the other 2 grew on day 6, which again is a difference from Colombia, because the 2 embryos that made it to blastocyst there, they were both day 7s. And so I think that was another win on this cycle compared to the previous ones that we've had done. Once the embryos made it to blastocyst, they were biopsied and frozen, and they were sent to RGI. And so this was all in the middle of December. We were scheduled to travel to Hawaii, and we ended up just doing just that. So the timing worked perfectly. And I think it also helped with the waiting game of waiting to hear back the genetic results too, because those took 3 weeks, and 2 of which we were in Hawaii. On January 5th, we got a call from the geneticist, and she told us that 2 out of the 3 embryos were genetically cleared. All 3 of them actually tested negative for TSC, which is great, but 1 of them was not chromosomally normal. So unfortunately, they wouldn't recommend to consider that as a viable embryo. And oddly enough, or interestingly enough, or frustratingly enough, the 1 embryo that was not chromosomally clear was actually the day 5 blastocyst. And we later learned that it was the more well-rated or highest rated embryo out of the 3. So it's really interesting how it was, I guess, the best rated in terms of development to grow to blastocyst, but it just genetically was not clear. But so long story short, 1 out of the 3 was just not good. But we did end up with 2, and we met with our fertility doctor to discuss what I just talked about briefly, the grading of the embryo. And this is also very technical, and it's the first time that I've even been exposed to this sort of grading. And I think different clinics have different grading systems. And in essence, I think they rate things like the area of the embryo that would develop into the baby, the area of the embryo that would develop into the placenta, and then something else. So essentially the grading is a number and 2 letters. And I'm not sure if this is across all the clinics, but that's how mine is. And so 1 of the embryos was rated a 3B/C. So I guess they were torn either a 3BC or a 3CC. And that ranks, I guess, between average and good. And the other embryo was rated a 1cc, which I think is more on the poor side of the scale. This translates into the success percentage, both for implantation as well as live birth. So there's, I guess, 2 sets of percentages. One is the likelihood that the embryo will implant itself, and then the other percentage is how likely the embryo is to turn into a live birth. And long story short, the 3BCC or 3CC has about a 50 to 55% chance to leading into a live birth, whereas the 1cc has about a 10 to 15%. So very, very big difference. However, I think we're still ecstatic to have the 1, and our fertility doctor said that he felt pretty good about the odds of that 1 turning into a pregnancy. He said one of his patients had just gotten pregnant off of 1 that was rated the same, and that all in all, he felt pretty good about that 1. He wouldn't necessarily, under normal conditions, recommend the 1cc for transfer at all, but given our unique situation and how we just have, a low probability of getting embryos and how we ended up with just 2, he would still leave it up on the table, I guess, for consideration. So I think all in all, the cycle started off very bumpy with us canceling the first cycle, but eventually things got back on track and we ended up with 1 pretty good embryo that is genetically cleared and that has pretty good chance of implanting and turning into a baby. So next steps now, and this is really recent, we literally just spoke with the doctor this past weekend, and the choices are to either 1, go ahead and try to implant the embryo and see what happens, or 2, try for a 3rd cycle and see if we can get more embryos so that, whether the first one doesn't work or we do want a 2nd baby in the future, we have those embryos stored. And it's not an easy decision because, I do have my lung problem, which I haven't been taking my medication for in the past, I think 4 to 5 months now. And luckily my lungs have been great. I just did a pulmonary function test and it remains unchanged, but it's still a decision of, do we want to go ahead and implant 1 and, pretty much, I guess, be comfortable that we would be 1 and done, or would we want to potentially have a 2nd? Because the odds are, if I were to get pregnant now and have a baby, my lung function is not guaranteed at the end of a pregnancy, and so it becomes a matter of not being able to pursue a cycle thereafter. And again, I do have low ovarian reserves to begin with and poor egg quality, so in a year things may be worse. Or we just go through another cycle at about 2 months of the process and then consider implantation, or I guess a transfer of an embryo. All in all, lots to think about, and all of this happened in the span of the last 2 months, along with, my birthday, the holidays, us traveling. So definitely things have been a little busy, but I wanted to just come on here and share what has happened and where we're at right now. And hopefully it won't take me too long to make the next update video, but this is where we are. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, bye.